You're gonna rot here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin. I never thought my own son, the child I poured my soul into, would betray me like this. With a snarl, he shoved me into this icy Ohio shed, roaring, "You're gonna rot here!" as he smashed my phone to bits, shattering my last hope. Left to starve, abandoned in agony while he flaunts his wealth on a Hawaiian getaway. My heart screams with a pain so raw, so unbearable, it feels like death itself. My name is Margaret, a 8-year-old widow from Lancaster, Ohio, and the pain of my son's betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. I never thought I'd end up locked in that freezing shed, my screams echoing against the splintered wood. But to understand how I got here, you need to know the life I poured into James. When my husband died in a car accident, leaving me alone with a 6-year-old boy, I swore I'd give him everything. As a nurse working grueling night shifts at Lancaster General Hospital, I stitched together our lives with every paycheck. I'd skip meals to buy James new sneakers for school, their bright laces a stark contrast to my worn-out scrubs. I remember the summer of '98, scraping together $200 from overtime to get him that shiny red bike he begged for at the county fair. His grin, wider than the Ohio River, made every ache in my bones worth it. I sold my grandmother's ring to pay for his college tuition at Ohio State. Watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown, my heart swelling with pride. "Mom, you're my hero," he'd say, hugging me tight. For 30 years, I lived for those words, believing my sacrifices built a bond unbreakable. But then Laura entered his life, and everything changed. Her shadow looms over our story, a storm waiting to break. How did my loving son turn into a monster? Let me tell you about the woman who stole him away. The moment Laura walked into our lives, it was like a cold Ohio wind swept through my home, chilling every corner of the warmth James and I had built. Laura, a 5-year-old lawyer with a polished smile that never touched her eyes, strutted into my Lancaster kitchen like she owned it. Her tailored suits and $500 heels screamed ambition, but her gaze cut through me like I was nothing more than a dusty relic from James's past. I tried to welcome her, God knows I did. I spent hours perfecting my meatloaf recipe, the one James loved since he was a boy, hoping to win her over at our first Sunday dinner. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is quaint, but we prefer lighter fare, you know, organic, farm to table." Her words stung, but James just nodded, his eyes fixed on his plate, avoiding mine. The son who once begged for seconds of my cooking now pushed it around like it was beneath him. At first, I told myself it was just her way, that she'd warm up. I invited them to my small clapboard house every weekend, setting out my best china, the set I'd saved for years to buy for James's high school graduation. I even spent $30 on a bottle of wine Laura mentioned in passing, hoping she'd see I was trying. But every gesture was met with a smirk or a backhanded remark. "Margaret, you shouldn't strain yourself," she'd say, her lips curling as if my efforts were pathetic. "We're fine dining at the new bistro in Columbus next week." James, my James, said nothing, his silence louder than any insult. I'd catch him glancing at her, seeking her approval, like a puppy waiting for a treat. The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees now acted like I was an embarrassment. It wasn't just the dinners. Laura's influence seeped into every part of our lives. When James got a promotion at his construction firm, I threw a small party at home, decorating with streamers and baking his favorite apple pie. I invited our neighbors, the ones who'd watched him grow up. Laura arrived late, her heels clicking on my hardwood floor, and whispered to James, "This is so small town." My colleagues would have thrown something classier. I overheard her, standing by the sink, my hands trembling as I washed dishes. James didn't defend me. He just shrugged and said, "Yeah, you're right, babe." That word babe felt like a slap. He'd never called anyone that, not even his high school girlfriends. The visits grew shorter, colder. James used to spend hours chatting with me about his dreams, his plans to build skyscrapers in Chicago. Now, he'd rush in, Laura trailing behind, and ask for favors like I was their personal errand runner. "Mom, can you make your lasagna for Laura's office party?" he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. I'd spend all day in the kitchen, chopping onions, simmering sauce, only for Laura to text later. "It was fine. But next time, maybe try something less heavy." Each time I swallowed the hurt, telling myself it was for James. I loaned him $2,000 for a new suit to impress his boss, then $5,000 for a down payment on their fancy SUV. "I'll pay you back, Mom," he promised, but the money never came. My savings, scraped together from years of 12-hour shifts at the hospital, dwindled with every request. The worst was the way Laura spoke about me, right in my own home. One evening, as I set out coffee and homemade cookies, I overheard her in the living room, her voice sharp as a blade. "James, your mother's too clingy. She needs to get a life outside of you. It's unhealthy." My heart stopped. Clingy? I'd given up my dreams, my social life, everything to raise him. James's response was a mumble. "I know, I'll talk to her." He never did. Instead, he started pulling away, canceling our Sunday dinners, claiming he and Laura were too busy. Busy with what? Cocktail parties with her lawyer friends? Golfing with her boss at the country club? I was losing my son, and Laura was the thief, stealing him with every calculated word. By last spring, James's visits were down to once a month, always with Laura, who'd sit on my couch like a queen, checking her phone while I tried to talk to my son. "Margaret, you look tired," she'd say, her voice laced with fake concern. "Maybe you should rest instead of fussing over us." Fussing? I was fighting to keep my family together. James would nod, his eyes distant, as if I were a stranger he had to tolerate. The pain of his indifference was a slow poison, eating away at the love I'd carried for 30 years. But it was about to get worse, so much worse, at the Thanksgiving dinner that would break me completely. The Thanksgiving dinner at Lancaster's First Presbyterian Church was supposed to be a night of gratitude, a moment to celebrate community and family under the warm glow of string lights and the smell of roasted turkey. For me, Margaret, a 8-year-old widow who'd spent 30 years raising James alone, it was a chance to feel proud. I'd nominated him for the Citizen of the Year award years ago, back when he was my shining star, volunteering at the local food bank and helping rebuild homes after the Ohio floods. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, wearing the navy dress I'd sewn myself, expecting to share his moment of glory. But when the pastor called James to the stage, my heart plummeted into a pit of despair deeper than I'd ever known. James strode up, his $1,000 suit gleaming under the church lights, Laura at his side in a crimson gown that screamed wealth. The crowd clapped, their faces beaming with pride for my son, the boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college. I waited for him to call me up, to acknowledge the mother who'd made it all possible. Instead, he took the microphone, his voice smooth as ever, and said, "This award belongs to my wife, Laura, who's shown me what ambition really means." The crowd cheered, but I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. Not a single word about me, not a glance in my direction. I clutched my purse, my knuckles white, hoping for a nod, a smile, anything. But James turned to Laura, kissing her cheek, while she basked in the spotlight like a queen claiming her throne. Then came the moment that shattered me. As the applause died down, Laura leaned into the microphone, her voice sharp and deliberate. "We're building a new life," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd but never meeting mine. "Some people belong in the past, and we're ready to move forward without that baggage." The word baggage hit me like a sledgehammer. The church went silent, or maybe it was just the blood roaring in my ears. I saw neighbors shift uncomfortably, some glancing at me with pity. James stood there, his face blank, letting his wife's words carve me open in front of 200 people. My son, the one I'd starved for, the one I'd sold my mother's jewelry for, Let her call me baggage. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. I sat there, frozen, as tears burned my eyes, each one a testament to a lifetime of sacrifice, now reduced to nothing. I stumbled out of the church, the cold November air biting my face as I walked the half-mile home alone. The streets of Lancaster, usually so comforting with their familiar porches and glowing jack-o'-lanterns, felt like a graveyard of my dreams. I kept replaying Laura's words, her smug smile, and James's silence, each memory a fresh wound. At home, I collapsed onto my worn couch, staring at the framed photo of James at his high school graduation, his arm around me, both of us grinning. That boy was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd let his wife humiliate me in public. I sobbed until my throat was raw, the pain so raw it felt like my soul was bleeding out. I'd given him everything, my youth, my savings, my heart, and he'd thrown it all away for a woman who saw me as trash. The next morning, my neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door, her face etched with worry. "Margaret, I saw what happened at the church," she said, her voice trembling. "That was cruel. You don't deserve this." I tried to brush it off, but my voice broke. "He's my son, Dorothy. How did it come to this?" She hugged me, her arms a lifeline in my sea of despair. "You've got to stand up for yourself," she said. "You're stronger than you know." Her words lit a spark in the ashes of my heart. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. That night, as I lay in bed, the pain of James's betrayal fueled a fire I hadn't felt in years. I was done being the victim. It was time to fight back. That Thanksgiving night at the church broke something inside me, but it also woke me up. I had spent decades pouring my heart into James, only to be called baggage in front of my entire community. The pain was a wildfire, burning through every memory of sacrifice, every skipped meal, every extra shift at the hospital, every dollar I'd saved for his future. But Dorothy's words, "You're stronger than you know," echoed in my mind, a lifeline pulling me from despair. I was done begging for scraps of love from a son who'd chosen Laura's venom over me. That night, as I sat in my quiet living room, the glow of my old table lamp casting shadows on the walls, I made a vow. I would not be the victim anymore. I would fight back, not with tears, but with a plan as sharp as the betrayal that cut me. The next morning, I called Dorothy, my neighbor, and a retired court clerk who knew the ins and outs of Lancaster's legal system. "I need your help," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "James and Laura think they can walk all over me, but I'm going to show them they're wrong." Dorothy arrived within the hour, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes sharp with determination. Over coffee at my kitchen table, I spilled everything the loans James never repaid, Laura's cruel remarks, the way they'd planned to profit from my life's work. "Margaret, this is abuse," Dorothy said, slamming her mug down. "You need evidence. Hard proof." She was right. If I was going to reclaim my dignity, I needed to be smarter than they were. I started small but deliberate. I bought a $50 nanny cam from the local Walmart and hid it in my living room, disguised as a clock on the mantel. Every time James and Laura visited, I let it roll, capturing their words, their sneers, their demands. I recorded phone calls on my old flip phone, saving every voicemail where James asked for money, $3,000 for a new television, $1,500 for a work trip that sounded more like a vacation. Laura's texts were even worse, dripping with disdain. "Margaret, don't bother cooking next week. We're dining with important people." I saved everyone, building a digital vault of their betrayal. I even dug through my bank statements, printing out records of the $8,000 I'd loaned them over the years. Every cent unpaid, every promise broken. Dorothy taught me how to protect myself legally. "You need to secure your assets," she said, handing me a business card for a lawyer named Tom Bradley, who specialized in elder law. I met Tom at his office downtown, a small brick building across from the Lancaster courthouse. "Margaret, what they're doing could be financial abuse," he said, his voice calm but firm. "If you're serious, We can draft a new will and file a restraining order if it comes to that. I nodded, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. I'm serious, I said. I want control of my life back. We spent an hour outlining a new will, one that would leave my $150,000 house and $40,000 savings to a local charity for single mothers. Not a dime to James or Laura. It felt like cutting off a limb, but also like shedding chains. Back home, I started planning something bigger. I knew James and Laura were greedy, obsessed with my property's value. They'd mentioned selling it for $400,000 after renovations. I decided to use that greed against them. I called James, my voice trembling with feigned weakness. Son, I'm thinking about the will, I said. Maybe we should talk. He took the bait, his tone smug. Good, Mom. Laura and I will come by tomorrow. Let's get this sorted. I hung up, my heart pounding, not with fear but with purpose. I wasn't just protecting my money, I was protecting my soul. Dorothy agreed to be my witness, hiding in the kitchen during their visit. I set up the nanny cam, checked my recordings, and prepared a fake will to show them one that named James as the sole heir. It was a trap, and they were walking right into it. As I locked my bedroom door that night, I felt a fire I hadn't known in years. Tomorrow they'd see the woman they'd underestimated, and they'd regret it. The next morning, as the sun crept over the rolling hills of Lancaster, Ohio, I stood in my kitchen, my heart pounding like a drum. The pain of their betrayal calling me baggage at the church, draining my savings, treating me like a burden had forged a steel resolve in me. I'd spent weeks collecting evidence, recordings, texts, bank statements proving the $8,000 they'd borrowed and never repaid. The nanny cam hidden in my living room clock was rolling, and Dorothy, my neighbor and confidant, was stationed in the kitchen, ready to witness it all. I'd prepared a fake will naming James as my sole heir, a bait to lure them into my trap. When their shiny SUV pulled into my driveway, I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the fight of my life. James and Laura walked in, their arrogance filling my small clapboard house like a storm cloud. Laura's $600 purse swung from her arm, and James's polished shoes squeaked on my hardwood floor. Morning, Mom, he said, his voice smug, as if he'd already won. Let's make this quick. Laura perched on my couch, crossing her legs like a queen. I hope you've come to your senses about the will, she said, her smile as cold as an Ohio January. I played the part of the broken old woman, my shoulders slumped, my voice soft. I've thought it over, I said, handing them the fake will. This leaves everything to you, James, the house, my $40,000 savings, all of it. Their eyes lit up, greed sparkling like the diamond on Laura's finger. James scanned the document, nodding. Good call, Mom. This is what's best for everyone. I let them savor their victory for a moment before I spoke again, my voice trembling with feigned hesitation. There's just one thing, I said, gesturing toward the door to my backyard shed. I found something of your grandfather's out back. I thought you'd want to see it before we finalize this. Curiosity flickered in James's eyes, and Laura, sensing no threat, followed, her heels clicking impatiently. I led them across the frosty grass to the shed, the same one where James had locked me in my nightmare. The door creaked as I opened it, revealing the dim, musty interior. It's in here, I said, flipping on a single bulb that cast eerie shadows on the wooden walls. They stepped inside, and I closed the door behind us, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The shed wasn't just a storage space anymore, it was my war room. Tacked to the walls were photos of James's unpaid loan agreements, screenshots of Laura's texts mocking me as pathetic, and transcripts of their phone calls plotting to sell my $150,000 house for $400,000 after getting rid of the old lady. A recorder sat on a shelf playing Laura's voice. Margaret's house is our ticket to the good life. Their faces drained of color, James's jaw dropping, Laura's eyes wide with panic. What the hell is this? She shrieked, ripping a photo from the wall. "You've been spying on us?" "Spying?" I said, my voice no longer trembling but sharp as a blade. "No, Laura, I've been surviving. You thought you could bleed me dry, humiliate me, and walk away with my life's work. But this old nurse isn't as weak as you thought." James lunged for the recorder, but I stepped in front of it, my eyes locking onto his. "You don't get to destroy this, James. Not like you destroyed my trust." Laura's voice rose to a scream. "This is illegal. You can't record us without consent." I laughed, a sound so bitter it surprised even me. "In Ohio, I can record anything in my own home, and every word you've said, every lie you've told, is now my weapon." "Dan." James's hands shook as he read a bank statement showing the $5,000 I'd loaned for their SUV. "Mom, this is crazy," he stammered. "We're family." "Family?" I spat, my voice breaking with years of pent-up rage. "Family doesn't call their mother baggage in front of a church. Family doesn't borrow thousands and laugh behind her back. You're not my son anymore, you're a thief." Laura clutched the fake will, her face twisting with fury. "You'll regret this, Margaret. We'll sue you into the ground." I stepped closer, my heart a furnace of defiance. "Try it," I said. "But first, you'll have to explain this to the world." I pointed to a laptop on a crate, its webcam light glowing red. "Everything you've said is streaming live to my lawyer, Tom Bradley, and half the neighbors in Lancaster." Their panic was a symphony, their smugness crumbling like dry leaves. But I wasn't done. They'd pushed me too far, and now they'd face the consequences of their greed in a way they never expected. The air in the shed was thick with tension, the dim light flickering as James and Laura stood frozen, their faces pale as the Ohio frost outside. I, Margaret, a 6-8-year-old widow who'd given my life for my son, had just unveiled my arsenal of evidence, photos, recordings, bank statements exposing their greed and cruelty. The laptop's red light blinked, streaming every word to my lawyer and neighbors, their smugness shattered like glass. But the fire in me wasn't done burning. I'd planned for this moment, every step calculated to make them pay for the years of humiliation, for calling me baggage, for draining my savings. I thought the truth would be enough to break them, but James's desperation was about to ignite a new kind of chaos. "You think you've won?" James roared, his voice a snarl I barely recognized. He stepped closer, his 6-foot frame towering over me, his eyes wild with rage. "You're nothing, Mom, a pathetic old woman playing detective." His words were venom, each one a fresh wound. But I stood my ground, my heart pounding with a fury I'd never known. Laura clutched the fake will, her knuckles white, her face a mask of panic. "James, do something," she hissed, her voice shrill. "She can't get away with this." Before I could respond, James lunged forward, grabbing a rusty shovel leaning against the shed wall. With a guttural yell, he swung it, smashing a wooden crate that held my childhood keepsakes, a porcelain figurine from my mother, a photo of James as a boy, splinters flying like shrapnel. "You'll regret this," he screamed, raising the shovel again, his face twisted with a rage that chilled my blood. I stumbled back, my breath catching, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd prepared for this. My hand slipped into my cardigan pocket, finding the small panic button I'd bought for $20 at the hardware store after Thanksgiving. I pressed it hard, sending a silent signal to Dorothy and the neighbors I'd rallied. "James, stop!" I shouted, my voice steady despite the chaos. "You're only making this worse." He froze, the shovel still raised, his chest heaving. Laura grabbed his arm, her eyes darting to the laptop. "She's bluffing," she spat. "That stream's fake. She's got nothing." But the creak of my back gate told a different story. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, and within seconds, Dorothy burst into the shed, flanked by 3 neighbors: Tom from across the street, a retired cop, Susan, who ran the local bakery, and Mike, a volunteer firefighter. Their phones were out, recording every second of James's meltdown. "What the hell is this?" James bellowed, dropping the shovel with a clang, his bravado crumbling as the neighbor's cameras captured his rage. Dorothy stepped forward, her 70-year-old frame radiating authority. "Margaret warned us you'd gone too far, James," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is over." Laura's face twisted with fury. "You can't record us. This is private property." Tom, the ex-cop, shook his head, his phone steady. "You're threatening a senior citizen in her own home. That's not private, it's a crime." Susan was already uploading the footage to Lancaster's community Facebook group, her fingers flying over her screen. "This is going viral," she said, her voice trembling with disgust. "The whole town's gonna see what you've done." James's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as he realized the trap had snapped shut. Laura, her composure gone, shrieked, "You'll pay for this, Margaret! We'll sue you for everything!" But her threats were hollow, drowned out by the sound of sirens in the distance. Tom had called the police as soon as my panic button went off. I stood taller, my voice calm but laced with steel. "You thought you could bury me, Laura, but I'm not the one who's finished." The shed door swung open wider as the neighbors parted, their faces a mix of shock and support. I looked at James, the boy I'd raised, now a stranger consumed by greed. "You broke my heart," I said, my words cutting deeper than any shovel could. "But you won't break me." The police lights flashed through the shed's small window, painting the walls red and blue. James and Laura were cornered, their plans unraveling before the eyes of Lancaster. But this wasn't the end, not yet. I had one final move to make, one that would seal their fate and set me free. The police lights pulsed through the shed's grimy window, casting a harsh glow on James and Laura's faces, now drained of their arrogance. I, Margaret, a 6-8-year-old widow from Lancaster, Ohio, stood tall amidst the wreckage of my son's betrayal. The shed, once a prison in my nightmares, had become the stage for my triumph. James's shovel lay on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remains of my mother's porcelain figurine, a symbol of the life I'd sacrificed for him. Laura's $600 purse hung limply from her arm, her crimson gown wrinkled, her composure shattered. The neighbors, Dorothy, Tom, Susan, and Mike, stood as my army, their phones still recording, their eyes blazing with disgust at the couple who'd tried to destroy me. The evidence I'd unveiled, recordings, texts, bank statements proving their $8,000 theft, had stripped them bare, and the live stream to my lawyer, Tom Bradley, ensured their greed would haunt them. But James's violent outburst, smashing my keepsakes, had pushed this beyond a family feud. It was a crime, and Lancaster was watching. The police burst in, 2 officers in crisp uniforms, their faces stern as they took in the scene. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Officer Daniels asked, his hand on his radio. I nodded, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "I'm fine now," I said, my eyes locked on James, who stood frozen, his hands trembling. Laura's voice cracked as she shrieked, "This is a setup! She's lying!" But Susan held up her phone, the video of James's rampage already shared to the town's Facebook group, racking up views by the second. "You're done, Laura," Susan said, her voice cold. "The whole town knows what you did." The officers listened as I recounted the years of manipulation, the loans, the humiliation at the church, and now this James threatening me with a shovel. Dorothy corroborated every word, her voice fierce. "I saw it all," she said. "They've been bleeding her dry for years." James sank to his knees, his $1,000 suit stained with shed dust, his face crumpling. "Mom, I didn't mean it," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. I got caught up." His words were a hollow echo of the boy I'd raised, the one who'd hugged me at the county fair, promising to make me proud. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd let Laura's greed consume him. "Caught up?" I said, my voice ablade. "You called me baggage, James. You took my money, my trust, and you tried to break me. You don't get to cry now." Laura lunged forward, her face twisted with rage. "You're a spiteful old woman," she screamed. "You'll die alone, and we'll still get this house." Officer Daniels stepped between us, his hand raised. "That's enough," he said. "You're coming with us to answer some questions." The fallout was swift and merciless. The video Susan posted spread like wildfire, shared across Ohio and beyond. By the next morning, James had been fired from his construction firm. His boss couldn't afford the scandal. Laura's law firm dropped her, citing ethical concerns after clients saw the footage. They fled Lancaster in shame, their dreams of a $400,000 profit from my house reduced to ash. I changed the locks on my clapboard home, the one I'd fought to keep, and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I walked through my garden, the roses I'd planted with James as a boy blooming brighter than ever. I joined the senior book club at the library, where Dorothy and Susan welcomed me with open arms. My house, my life, was mine again. At 68, I'd learned a truth that burned brighter than my pain. Self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. I'd given everything to James, believing a mother's love meant endless sacrifice. But love without boundaries is a cage, and I'd broken free. I wasn't just a widow from Lancaster anymore. I was a woman who'd fought for her dignity and won. As I sat on my porch, sipping coffee under the Ohio stars, I knew the hardest part was still ahead, sharing this story with the world. To warn others, to inspire them to stand up. I was ready to speak, to call others to action, to show that no one, not even a son, can take your worth away. As I sit on my porch in Lancaster, Ohio, the evening breeze carries the scent of my roses, and the stars above seem brighter than they have in years. I'm Margaret, a 8-year-old widow who fought to reclaim my dignity from a son who betrayed me, from a daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing but a stepping stone to their wealth. The pain of James's words, "You're gonna rot here," and Laura's cruel dismissal at the church, calling me baggage, will never fully fade. But standing in that shed, facing their greed with my evidence, I learned a truth that set me free. My worth isn't defined by those who hurt me. It's defined by me. At 68, I've rebuilt my life, surrounded by neighbors like Dorothy, who reminded me I'm not alone. My home, my $150,000 sanctuary, is mine again, and my heart, once shattered, now beats with purpose. This journey taught me lessons I wish I'd known sooner. Lessons I want to share with you, because no one should feel like they're nothing. First, set boundaries, even with those you love most. I gave James everything, $8,000 in loans, my youth, my dreams, thinking that's what mothers do. But love without limits is a trap. Say no when someone takes advantage, even if it's your own child. Second, find your community. I was so focused on James that I forgot the strength of friends like Dorothy or the Lancaster Book Club that welcomed me back. Reach out to your neighbors, your church, your local senior center. There are people who lift you up. Finally, protect your legacy. I almost lost my home and $40,000 savings to greed. Talk to a lawyer. Secure your will. Know your rights. No one should steal what you've worked a lifetime to build. If my story has touched you, if it stirred something in your heart, I'm asking you to share it. Not for me, but for every person who's felt invisible, used, or cast aside. Hit that like button to show the world that stories like mine matter. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you do if someone you love turned their back on you? Your words might inspire someone else to stand up. And please, subscribe to the Unwanted Revenge channel. It's not just about my fight. It's about all of us who've had to rise from betrayal. Your support keeps these stories alive, shining a light for those still in the dark. I used to think love meant giving everything, even at the cost of myself. But now I know better. Self-respect is survival, and it's never too late to claim it. As I sip my coffee, watching the Ohio sunset paint the sky, I'm ready to live for me, not for James, not for Laura, but for the woman I've become. And there's one more thing I need to share. One final step to make sure no one else suffers like I did.